Hi, you guys. This is my mini lecture on forces of evolutionary change. It's chapter 12. We often hear this definition: evolution is descent with modification. So what does that actually mean? Descent, I've written for you here, implies it is inheritable. So we're talking about something that you can inherit. Modification has to do with some change that happened, a change that happened and then is going to be inherited. Okay, so that's the gist of it. I also wanted to show you, I wanted to start by showing you these pictures of camouflage. Camouflage is such an amazing result of natural selection. This is how some of these animals don't get eaten, right? By blending in with their background. And look how they blend. I mean, you get to wondering how in the world did this moth get to be exactly the same color as her background. And like that, there's many other examples in nature that I want to show you that you'll be stricken by, I hope. I bet you can't find the frog here. Can you see it? So there's a frog here. The head is here. This is one of its limbs, back legs. And another little back leg would be here, and that there would be the frog. This would be, look at this insect, and it's got these appendages here. These are antennae. The head would be here, and it completely blends in with this leaf. Blending in the sand. And those are some examples of how you don't get eaten in nature. So evolution is a genetic change, but more importantly, it's an allele frequency change. And we're going to talk a lot about that. Allele frequency change in a population over multiple generations. So the one classic example that you always hear about is the moths in Britain, in London, during the Industrial Revolution. So at that time, the trees were one color until they started polluting, right, with the factories. And when they started polluting, the trees got darker and darker. So what happened is that moths that used to rest on these trees were camouflaged, and all of a sudden were not camouflaged because the trees started to change color. So whereas you had a population where most of them were pretty light colored and some were dark, and now you're starting to make the trees all dark because of the pollution, then the ones that are going to survive, right, are the ones that blend, that are darker. So maybe a few generations later, there's many more of the darker ones because the white ones are getting eaten. And that continues on until there's a shift that you see over time, where most of the moths are going to be the dark ones because those are the ones that get to live, survive, leave offspring, and they're all going to look genetically like those parents. So that is a genetic change, an allele frequency change. So we talked about chromosomes having 2 alleles, and let's go back to that in a little bit. As definitions of evolution, we're going to make a differentiation between macroevolution and microevolution. So macroevolution is a change over a very long period of time and possibly with the surgence of a new species. This is a mammoth and an elephant. Okay, so this is different species. It's going to happen over a long period of time. As opposed to microevolution. And in microevolution, it's a much smaller scale. It happens in a population. It could be a beetle. This is good in insects. Beetle population that becomes resistant to a pesticide. A mosquito that becomes resistant to a pesticide. And you can see it in a lifetime of ours. So it's shorter term. To define a population, we're going to say the population is made up of interbreeding members of the same species, and evolution occurs in a population when allele frequencies change from one generation to the next. So there's the allele frequency thing again. This is a picture. We do this in our labs when it's in person. We have this PTC paper, And an interesting thing is it has a chemical on it that some of us taste and some of us don't. So we go around the classroom and we'll taste the paper, and some will find it horribly bitter, and others put it all over their tongue and say, I don't taste anything. So there's a gene for that, a gene for you being a taster or not being a taster. Now, that frequency of those genes is only going to change if one of the two is more adaptive. If it's better for you to be a taster, and those that are tasters survive, there's going to be more tasters. If it doesn't make any difference, it's going to probably be equal numbers of tasters or non-tasters. But those alleles for taste and not taste stay in a population or go away in a population. So it's that frequency of those genes that change in populations. So suppose a gene has two possible alleles, big A and little a, and that's one is taster or not taster. And so let's say you have a population of about 100 individuals. Okay? And then that gene would have 200 alleles, correct? Because each individual is inheriting one from one parent and one from the other. So if you add the alleles, you would have 200 of them in 100 individuals, right? And you might get from your dad taster and from the mom non-taster, but because it's dominant, you're going to be a taster. Okay, but the allele, those individual genes. Let's say that 160 of those in this population are little a. Okay? So then the frequency of that little a is 160 over the total possible, which is 200. So the frequency of that little allele, little a, is 0.8. And that's what we are going to measure when we think of allele frequencies. So if an allele frequency changes, it's because, let's say, all the non-tasters end up eating poison and they end up dying little by little. And if you're a non-taster, you don't taste this miserable poison and you end up dying. So you go shutting off some of those little a's, and there's a shift in the allele frequency. That is change. That is evolution. So it's important to think that, or know that an individual's alleles don't change. It's in a population that it changes, because you leave offspring that don't have the little a, and the next generation leaves offspring without the little a, and little by little you would have a shift in that frequency. This is shown in rabbits, the same thing. If you had a bunch of brown rabbits, it could be big B, or big B, little b. Or the white rabbit, this little b. And some horrible disease comes along and wipes out all the white rabbits. Okay, so then you're wiping out many of these little b alleles. This one is still there because big B, little b still makes a brown rabbit. But you would seriously alter that frequency of that little b in the population. In the rabbits, I did away with all the white rabbits. What's left? Big B, little b, and that, remember, is going to stay in the population because of the heterozygous stays in the population. But there has been a shift. Now we have many more big B's in that population than the little ones that we did away with. So evolution is the change in allele frequencies. An allele frequency defined for you here is calculated by the following equation. Number of copies of an allele. Remember, we counted out of 100 individuals, we had 200. So number of those copies, how many we had of the little a, for example, over the total number of alleles for that same gene in the population. In this case of the brown rabbits, it could be, what is the frequency of big B over the total of all the alleles? We're going to stop there, and a picture of the mouse is a video that I want you to watch.